So on my Facebook page, there appeared in my newsfeed a photo of a billboard that said, "Cremation is your last chance to get a smoking hot body." So who here wants to get a smoking hot body? Who's choosing cremation after they die, of course? Okay. Anybody prefer burial? Oh, you're in the minority, I'm sorry. Anybody considering donating their body to science? Oh, the people who also want to be cremated. Well, after you. Anybody not planning on dying? Yes! All right, we always get a couple. Where do you see yourselves in 100 years? Well, there's a proverb, Proverb 22:3, that says, "The prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions, while the simpleton charges blindly ahead and pays the consequences." Benjamin Franklin, our American sage, tells us, who wanted the turkey to be the national bird, said that the only two inevitabilities in life are death and taxes. Now, we're only slightly more inclined to deal with our taxes because we'll be alive to pay the consequences if we don't. But there's a lot of people who don't want to deal with planning for their own funerals, planning for advance directives, wills, trusts. Now, how many of you have actually undertaken all of those planning tasks? Not all of them, maybe some of them, okay. Well, let me give you a little background about how I became the Doyen of Death. I actually come from a background as a public relations professional and event planner, and funerals are the parties no one wants to plan. I actually came to this because I got married for the second time in 2000. Had a very creative Jewish Western wedding. I wore cowboy boots. I'm still wearing cowboy boots today. I'll show you mine later. And everybody had such a good time. I was all jazzed to write a book about creative life cycle events and call it Matchings, Hatchings, and Dispatchings, about weddings, births, and deaths. And I got to write a column in the Albuquerque Tribune by that name, and it was the columns on death and funerals that got the most reader response. And it told me there's a real need to be able to have this conversation. And having humor is an important way to draw people to this conversation. The thing was, I never planned a funeral for anybody before. So I picked on my father-in-law, who was getting up there in years, had 3 open heart surgeries in his lifetime, and after the third operation, which was an aortic valve replacement, he was in a coma for 10 days. And he came out of that coma, and his doctor said, "You better get your affairs in order." So he had done financial planning, but he hadn't done any funeral planning, and this was several years after that last operation. So he was 79 at the time. And yeah, I mean, not bad for a guy who chain smoked earlier in his life. So my husband and I went to French funerals, and I was amazed how much information we needed that we didn't have. And it was really good he was still alive to provide that information. So over dinner one night, I'm talking with Norm, my father-in-law, and Myra, my mother-in-law, and Norm's like, "Sure, I'll get you the family history and my social security number and my veterans papers, and I'm going to write my own obituary." I'm thinking, this is good, he's really into this. And then I look over at Myra, my mother-in-law. She's looking down at the roast beef and the mashed potatoes. She doesn't want to think about this. She doesn't want to talk about it. No, Norm will live forever. Denial, it's not a river in Egypt. But we got past that, and Norm actually lived to 82. And at the age of 82, while walking through a doorway, he fell and broke his hip. And you may know that leads to decline. They did a hip replacement surgery, which was successful, but it was the beginning of a 7-week downhill slide. with 3 ER admissions. On the third one, they said, look, we can't fix him. He was having trouble breathing, and basically he was inhaling anything he ate or drank. So he was admitted on palliative care, and that was quite a blessing. Although there was some conflict within our family during that time over, trying to keep him alive versus letting him go in peace. But within a week, he did pass. He died. Let's just say the D word. He died. But we were all there when he took his last breath. It was a beautiful passing. And it was midnight on a Tuesday after 7 weeks of schlepping back and forth to the hospital. We were exhausted. But we went to the funeral home the next day. Because we had pre-planned, it was easy, it was quick. We tweaked a few things we had set up. Myra put it all on her credit card. Think of the points, the miles. And she even looked me in the eye afterwards and said, I really didn't like it when you were pre-planning, but now when we needed it, I'm really glad it was done. And she smiled. And guess what? Norm did not write his own obituary. That was one part that fell short. But this gave me my mission. Just like talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead. And your family really does benefit from the conversation. So why do we avoid generally talking about this conversation? I mean, my husband and I, we say death lives at our house because we talk about it all the time. Well, we don't want to say goodbye to the people we love. We're afraid of pain. We're afraid of the pain of the loss of people we love. We're afraid of pain with the physical decline we experience as we get older. And hospice, by the way, and palliative care is such a blessing. In fact, people who have gone on hospice or palliative care actually live longer, better lives. Yeah.
I think I know, but would you please define those two words?
Define hospice and palliative care.
Please.
Yes. Hospice is let me tell you what palliative care is before hospice. Palliative care is addressing the medical needs of a condition that a person has with the idea of making them comfortable rather than trying to find a cure for whatever is ailing them. So making them comfortable. Taking it a step further, hospice is a service when we recognize, the medical establishment recognizes that whatever this condition is, that person probably has about 6 months left to live. That this condition could kill them within 6 months. That, in turn, initiates a whole team of support. If you're over 65, it's all covered by Medicare, and that gives you a doctor, nurses, spiritual support, chaplains, and social work support. So it's not only for the patient, but it's also for the family, and to help the family deal with the upcoming loss of that person. And in fact, people flunk out of hospice. The care that they get is so good, or some people say it's graduating. I say it's flunking out because they didn't die. They get better. And you can go off of hospice and go back on it later on. So I highly recommend, if you're facing a situation with a family member who has an illness, a debilitating illness, to check into both palliative and hospice care. Rather than torturing our loved ones to death, seeking, a cure for something that's not curable, it's a recognition of our mortality. And that is a difficult thing for a lot of people, which is bringing me to my third point about why we don't talk about death and dying. Have you ever heard of Dr. Ernest Becker's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death? He wrote it in the 1970s, and in it he lays out his terror management theory. that being, the theory being that we humans are generally terrified of the idea of our own mortality because as far as we know, we're the only animals who can conceive of this idea that we have a past, we have a present, we can think about our future, and when we think about our future without us there, we're terrified by that idea. We don't know what's beyond this physical lifetime. So this idea that we know that we're going to die is called mortality salience. And it takes good self-esteem to consider your own mortality. And the fact that you all knew what the topic was this morning and you came anyway tells me that you got the self-esteem to consider your own mortality. So give yourself a high five, raise your arm up, bend your elbow, pat yourself on the back, say, yes, I have that self-esteem, or across if your shoulder is high. So those without that high self-esteem to consider this topic, and it's estimated about 2/3 of the adult population here in the United States has low self-esteem. So that gives us the figure that about 25 to 30% of adults actually do advance directives, wills or trusts, and funeral planning. And why should we do this? Why is it a good thing? Who here has children? Okay, maybe less than half of you here. So number one, and I don't have children either, is that we don't have anybody to automatically throw the planning of a funeral onto if we don't have kids. Okay, maybe you have siblings you could throw it onto, but they're going to need information about you that would include your social security number. If you're a veteran, if you have veterans papers, where those are, because you can get benefits from the government for that. You need to know the mother's maiden name and place of birth. Now, if your sibling's planning it, chances are your sibling would know your mother's maiden name. But these are 4 things you need to know now because they go on death certificates. And whoever's pulling together that information for you needs that information. Or you can put it on file with a funeral home and let somebody know I have pre-planned and this information is already on file. By the way, my husband and I have pre-planned, but we didn't prepay. The funeral homes love to get you to prepay because that way, they know that they've got some business coming down the road. However, you do not have to prepay. What you do in the state of New Mexico is, if you were to prepay, it would be to do a insurance policy that you own, but would pay the funeral home where you've made your arrangements. And in exchange, they will lock in, as they like to say, today's prices that they control for funeral services. The beauty of the insurance policy is if you decide to move someplace else, you can take that policy to another funeral home, and whatever the amount of money that policy is for can transfer to another funeral home. You may have heard another funeral home here in Albuquerque advertising, bring your overpriced policies to me and I'll give you money back. It's true, they can do that. But since so many people do not even think about these kind of things, they don't know about it. So I am here as your Doyen of Death, your death educator, to help clue you into these types of things. So planning ahead, it's a consumer issue. Funerals, disposition, whatever you are thinking you might like to have done with your body, it costs money. And you need to shop around and figure out who's got the best deals, or who's got the best service, or who do you want your people to work with? Or do you want to work with them and put your plans on file? Number 2, it reduces stress at a time of grief like you would not believe. I mean, my own personal experience, after what we went through with my brother, my husband's brother, in the hospital, we were really nervous about the funeral arrangements. But because we had already set things up, it was easy. So that reduced a huge amount of stress that we were fearing we might face. And so that's number 3. You can minimize family conflict. And at least discussing your preferences. And 4th, you can create a meaningful, memorable, good goodbye. So, let's talk about a few of those disposition methods. Who here considers himself green? Do you recycle? Anybody recycle? Okay, yeah, fair amount of you. Have you even given thought to how green you want to be with your disposition? Let's talk about cremation, since so many seem to indicate they wanted to. Now, cremation, you might think is green. It's simple, it's easy, it's direct. Well, cremation has quite a carbon footprint. It does. Excuse me. Cremation generates 532 pounds of CO2 per cremation. Wow. Because you're using natural gas to fire up an oven, to burn your body, to burn away the flesh and the hair down to the bones. You're left with brittle bones, which are then ground up in what's called a cremulator. It's basically a grinder. They put your bones in there, they screen out any metal parts. And they do take out pacemakers, by the way, before putting you in the oven, because batteries explode in the oven, and we don't want that. Now, to put 532 pounds of CO2 into perspective, I have solar panels on my house. It's kind of a cloudy day today, so they're not cranking out as much electricity as they would on a sunny New Mexico day. But I have a monitoring system that tells me how much CO2 I'm offsetting by generating electricity from the sun. And I would have to run my solar panels, a 4.05 kilowatt system, for 14 sunny New Mexico days to offset one cremation. Wow. And we've got over 1 million people a year getting cremated, just in the United States. Our national rate is 42%. Here in New Mexico, it's averaging 60% of the population choosing cremation. In England, it's 74%. In Japan, it's 99%. So there's a lot of people being cremated. So if you don't want to contribute to global warming, you might want to reconsider cremation. But then people have issues with burial. Well, actually, when you think about space, cemeteries don't take up that much space. There's more Walmarts going in with their huge parking lots every single year, taking up more space than burial grounds. And burial grounds are nice places to visit, you know? A lot of people, you can walk your dog there, you can jog there. It's peaceful, it's green. So not so much that you're taking up space. And there are green burial grounds that are being developed all across the country. There's one that's being developed outside of Santa Fe that is supposed to be available for selling plots in spring of 2015.
So what's the definition of a green burial ground?
Well, you know, there are different shades of green. You can have like a total high desert landscaped with just maybe boulders as markers. But a conventional cemetery can also be a green resting ground, because Jewish and Muslim burial are very similar to green burial. There's no embalming. Muslims actually do shroud burials. Jews will generally have a plain pine or poplar casket, soft wood. The body is dressed in cotton or linen clothing, and the casket or the shroud is put in contact with the earth. Now, in a conventional cemetery, they will have some kind of either concrete or polydome liner to support the earth on top of the casket. But the body, the clothing, the casket, in contact with the earth, all deteriorates at the same rate. So ashes to ashes, dust to dust is the Jewish and Muslim way of burial. So you can get a green burial in a conventional cemetery. And in fact, some of the old Hispanic Catholic cemeteries around town will allow you to have burial in the earth in contact without even a liner or a vault on top.
Is composting legal and green?
Composting? Well, not yet. There is actually a new trend that you'll be hearing more about in the coming years called alkaline hydrolysis. And that uses less energy than cremation, about a tenth of the energy. The body is put into a tank with water and alkaline chemicals and brought up to a higher temperature and pressure, and the body basically dissolves into the basic building blocks of life within a couple of hours.
Wow.
Resulting in a coffee-colored sterile liquid that can be safely put down the drain. And the bones become sandy, kind of a sandy residue, and that can be returned to the family as cremated remains. So alkaline hydrolysis. There's also a new system that's being tested out up in Colorado called Burial.me, Burial.me, which could actually result in, I love this, it's like a box of vanilla-scented yogurt on your remains, and that can be buried in anybody's yard, in a churchyard, in your own backyard, whatever. And that's, one of the benefits of just a regular flame-based cremation. When you have cremated remains, there are so many things you can do with them. Now, you can bury them in your own backyard, but if you ever go to sell the house, unless you're going to dig up those remains and take them with you, you do need to let the people who are buying your house know, yes, there are some remains buried in the yard. There's a wonderful thing, Kabbalistically speaking. The Kabbalah is the books of mysticism from Judaism written between the 12th and the 16th centuries. And in it, one section called the Bridge of Life talks about the connection between the body and the spirit. Very interesting stuff. The spirit actually begins a separation from the body 30 days before death. How does the spirit know when the body is going to die? 3 days before death, there's a further separation. Then at the moment of death, the exhalation, that expiration, the soul leaves the body, but it doesn't go far. And for 3 days, the soul hangs around the body. This is what the Kabbalah tells us. And after the body is buried, the soul goes back and forth between the house where it used to live, which has now become the house of mourning in Jewish tradition, where you'd be sitting Shiva for 7 days, and the body in the graveyard. And then within 30 days, it starts to get the idea that it should be moving on to whatever comes next. And by the end of the full year, the spirit, the soul, is in heaven or wherever, whatever comes next. But will still occasionally return, and it's something that we see here in Albuquerque with the Day of the Dead celebration, that we welcome back our beloved people who have passed on, and pets. So if you cremate the body, the soul has no body to go visit, and it gets confused, and it gets really upset. So the idea of having a resting place for the remains, for the body, and cremation is kind of a violent process. I mean, you're putting a body in an oven and cooking it to bones. 1600 to 1800 degrees is what a retort runs to do the cremation process. So that's a few things to consider when you're considering these different disposition methods. Now, it is a mitzvah, it's a good deed, to donate your body to science to advance knowledge, or donating your organs, which of course depends on how you die. In some cases, you're only maybe your corneas or other specific organs might be viable for helping save someone else's life. So you want to certainly talk to people in your family about your preferences. Now, New Mexico is very friendly toward home funerals. Does anybody even want to think about that, dealing with your own dead? It's actually a beautiful thing. I'm on the Heber Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society. In fact, just yesterday, Friday, I washed and dressed a body of a woman. Women do it for women, men do it for men. We wash the body, we dress the body, we casket the body. And you are able to do that within your own home. You can work with a funeral home to help process the paperwork, but that's not required. You can register the death at the office of the registrar in Santa Fe and get a death certificate from the office of the medical investigator. That's basically that, but then you yourself can deal with keeping the body cool, have people come and visit, have some kind of ceremony to send off that person, and then either proceed to burial or cremation. If you're going to donate to science, something you need to know: have you done the paperwork?
I have.
You have. You signed up with UNM?
Yes.
Okay. Now, have you looked on the back of that card? It says there are possibility that they may not take your body when you die, in which case you need to have a plan B. And this happened here in Albuquerque this past summer. A gentleman who had cancer had signed up to donate his body to UNM. They were full when he died, and they wouldn't take his body. His wife wound up having to pay money to have his body cremated, and she was very upset about that, and of course, out the money to pay for the cremation. There are national services that can serve as a plan B. If UNM is full, BioGift, MedCure, and Life Legacy are 3 national services that will, at no cost to the family, pick up the body, take it for whatever they're going to do with it, surgery, research, whatever, cremate the body, and usually within 2 to 3 weeks, return the cremated remains to the family at no cost to them. So you need to have a plan B if donating your body to sciences, and you need to do the paperwork while you are alive and while you are of sound mind. So these are some key things that I would love for you to be aware of and to act upon. Now, some questions before you act and go talk to a funeral director, which I hope you will do, is: what disposition method do I want? Do I want my body put on display? By the way, if you think your family would want to take a look at your body, usually the funeral homes will say you have to be embalmed.
Isn't that just for dyed-in-the-wool exhibitionists?
Yeah! Me personally, I don't want my body put on display. In some cases, some people are just very visually oriented, and the message that this person is actually dead doesn't really strike them unless they see the person in the casket dead. And unless you're having a very quick, immediate family only for less than 30 minutes, the funeral home will say, if you're going to have a visitation with a viewing, that you have to take that extra step of embalming. Just so you know. Do I want a religious service? Well, we're here at the Unitarian Universalist having a service. I would hope you would seek some of the wisdom of the Unitarian Church to help us say goodbye to you. How green do I want to make my final arrangements? So we've talked about some of those variations on the scale of going green. And would I prefer memorial contributions instead of flowers? And so, if so, what organization would I want to donate to? Maybe the fellowship? And how would I like to be remembered? Now, this is a legacy that is built by our words and our deeds day by day. Or would they say you are kind and generous and loving? What will people say about you at your funeral? Now, I know we've got Thanksgiving coming up this week, and a lot of people will be together with ones they love, family and friends. Engage with Grace is an organization that encourages people to talk about what you want for advance directives. Would you want to be kept alive as long as possible on a ventilator? Those kind of difficult questions. When you're together with your loved ones, have a conversation. You can download a 5 questions, 5 simple questions that they offer on one sheet of paper. And maybe not over the turkey, but maybe over the pumpkin pie, or maybe on Saturday, Small Business Saturday, or opting out of Black Friday. Have a conversation at some point over the long weekend when you're with the people you love. Are there any other questions that I can help answer? Yes, sir.
It just occurred to me, I wonder, do they have sky burials? Like in China?
Sky burial. Well, Tibetan sky burials, where the ground is rocky and there's not firewood to burn, cremation, up in the mountains, they would put the body up on a platform.
I'm talking about where the birds eat you.
That's it. And then the birds of prey come and eat your flesh to the bone. We don't really do that here in the United States.
Can't be done?
No. American Indians might still be able to get away with it on their reservations, but I'm not even sure if they're doing that. Yes, ma'am.
Well, 3 years ago, several of us lost a spouse, and the simple way was the Sunday we talked about it. My kids were down here, and everybody had conversation about David, and then we did something that's considered illegal. We took his ashes up to and threw him off Cedar Crest.
That's not illegal, actually.
Well, they say it's illegal.
They say it's illegal because they don't want too many people doing it.
Yeah,
but scattering on public land is not illegal. In fact, you can get scattering permits for national parks.
Well, that's almost disappointing because we considered it his last act of civil disobedience.
There you go. I would make there must be thousands of people scattered up there on Sandia Mountain. If you are thinking about scattering somebody up there, I would recommend on the eastern side of the mountain, because the Sandia Pueblo lays claim to the western side, and it's disrespectful to the native peoples to
We did that.
scatter there.
On the east.
Okay, good for you. Good for you. And any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 little anecdotes.
2 anecdotes.
My grandparents came here the day after they got married in Australia in 1919, I believe.
Wow.
And on the ship coming over, they met a lady, and honestly, I think she must have been 20 years older than them, so she was in her 40s. And it was like, and she didn't have any other relatives, and my mother grew up calling her Aunt Susie. And I guess like immediately, she went to the largest mortuary in San Diego in 1919 and said, I don't have any other family, I don't want anybody to be responsible, I want to pay for my burial. She was 40 years old. Well,
good for her.
She lived to probably the mid-60s. And my mom said it, and she had been in a rest home, and she, they didn't have the name Alzheimer's then, but anyway, she had pretty well lost it for the last several years. And anyway, when she died, my mother said it was almost comical that usually when you go to the mortuary, the people are so bending over to be kind, and they were furious. They were
Because she had planned so far ahead.
because she had paid, so the amount she paid wasn't going to cover the cost of them. But she said they were rude to them, and it was ridiculous. So that was the first thing. That was because she paid for her burial so much earlier. But the second one is just absolutely, I don't know, coinky-dink. Just last week, my girlfriend and I were looking for something to watch on Netflix. So if you have Netflix, look up Undertaking Betty.
Oh, I love that film.
It's hysterical.
It is.
It's hysterical. It's just totally unpredictable, and it's really, really funny. So,
I use actually a series of scenes about the Star Trek funeral to illustrate the idea of personalizing, funerals. I do a number of talks usually with film clips and humor, and do have a list back there. If you know of any organizations that might like to have me speak, I would love to come. And I do encourage you to, at least go shop around before and figure out what you want done and talk to your people, and so you can reduce stress and conflict and save money and have a good goodbye. And let me, since we mentioned Benjamin Franklin, let me finish with this beautiful reading that he said at the funeral of a friend. We are spirits, that bodies should be lent us while they can afford us pleasure, assist us in acquiring knowledge, or in doing good for our fellow creatures is a kind and benevolent act of God. When they, our bodies, become unfit for these purposes and afford us pain instead of pleasure, instead of an aid become an encumbrance, and answer none of the intentions for which they were given, and it is equally kind and benevolent that a way is provided by which we may get rid of them. Death is that way. Our friend and we were invited abroad on a party of pleasure which is to last forever. His chair was ready first, and he has gone before us. We could not all conveniently start together. And why should you and I be grieved at this, since we are soon to follow and know where to find him? My friends, talking about sex won't make you pregnant. Talking about funerals won't make you dead. I hope you will start a conversation today. Thank you.